Hello again. Even if I had been an enthusiastic follower of the official line during the COVID epidemic, which I was not, hearing the phrase follow the science would have been enough to set alarm bells ringing loudly. Because in that context, follow the science meant stop asking questions, do as you are told, and obey the government. This is, of course, the very opposite of what science actually is. Science involves asking questions, forming theories, and then testing them by observation and experiment. It does not mean placing your trust in a higher authority and taking somebody else's word for what is happening in the world. That expression, follow the science, was coined in the early days of the COVID epidemic to stop ordinary people asking awkward questions about what was going on. It was specifically designed to dampen down speculation, to discourage inconvenient questions, and ensure that only the official version of events was accepted. It is similar in many ways, incidentally, to the phrase that one hears when climate change is being discussed, which is that the science is settled. That too is intended to stop questions, and just like follow the science, it is diametrically opposed to the very concept of science. The science is never settled. That is what distinguishes science from religious dogma. Of course, following the science as it was presented to us during the early days of COVID meant abandoning our common sense and taking on trust some extraordinary and implausible ideas which most people now accept are quite wrong. For instance, although the disease first appeared in the Chinese town of Wuhan, where the Wuhan Institute of Virology is located, and work was being conducted there at the time on manipulating various SARS viruses, which cause respiratory illnesses. The first cases of COVID occurred a few hundred yards from this laboratory. Needless to say, many people thought to themselves that this was more than a spooky coincidence. However, the official scientific line was that it was indeed no more than a weird coincidence, and that the real source of the infection was bats connected with a nearby marketplace. Those who persisted in speculating about a leak from the inaptly named biosafety laboratory in Wuhan were denounced as conspiracy theorists and urged to follow the science. Earlier this year, the director of the CIA ordered the release of an investigation which concluded the coronavirus was more likely to have leaked from a Chinese lab than to have come from animals. Gosh, who would have thought such a thing? I give a link to a news item which reports on the CIA business in the description to this video. Yes, who would have thought that? Who that is? Other than the millions of ordinary people who retained the use of their common sense in the midst of worldwide hysteria. The FBI has, by the way, come to a similar conclusion, as have other intelligence agencies across the world. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Science entails asking questions, observing the world, forming theories, and weighing up evidence. Across the world, many people were unwittingly actually doing science. They saw that a modified form of a coronavirus was sweeping from country to country around the world, and that it had its origin in an obscure Chinese town where there was a laboratory experimenting with modifying coronaviruses in just that way. They were then urged to believe that in fact the modified coronavirus had emerged from bats in a market near that biological laboratory. They weighed up the competing theories and chose the hypothesis which, as they saw it, best fitted the known facts. That is science. To then tell those folks to follow the science really was a bit rich. In fact, they were being urged to ignore science and believe their government instead. The call to follow the science was as meaningless and contradictory as the slogans from George Orwell's 1984: war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. Follow the science really meant in this context, abandon the scientific method and trust instead what you are told by politicians.